on their perspective and work in the field of marine biodiversity and the role they play in fostering sustainable growth and livelihoods, emphasizing on their particular country. But before we jump right into it, I just want to share some housekeeping rules. So this webinar is being recorded. Also, please keep your microphone muted during presentations, as there will be a question and answer segment at the end of the moderated discussion, where we will open the platform for individuals to ask any questions, share any opinions or comments, both using their microphone or the chat, where the panelists will address them. But as mentioned previously, we do have an exciting agenda for tonight's webinar. So we will not only have presentations delivered by our esteemed panelists, but also we will have a short reflection or year in review on GYBN Caribbean in honor of our 1-year anniversary, which will be delivered by my colleague Chauncey Henry. So that will be held before we start the presentations. After the presentations, we will move into the moderated discussion and the Q&A segment. After that, we will move into a webinar trivia, which will test your knowledge on the content featured in the presentations. After that, we will have a short insight into, GYBN's membership engagement and how interested youth can be a member, and then we will conclude. So now I would like to invite my colleague Chauncey, a fellow member of GYBN Caribbean, to deliver some remarks on GYBN's journey so far in honor of our 1-year anniversary. So over to you, Chauncey.
Hi, good night, everyone. Let me just share my screen quickly. So I have a PowerPoint to you to talk about GYBN's year in review. So in light of our first anniversary, we'd just like to do a quick reflection on our chapter. So when did GYBN Caribbean become a thing? So we officially launched last year, May 22nd, on International Biodiversity Day with a Biodiversity Matters webinar and a planning committee that was done over the year. So the chapter was launched with 4 interim steering committee members, and they're from various different countries in the Caribbean. And to date, since the chapter has started, we have had over 10 Caribbean countries, representatives from 10 Caribbean countries as a part of our chapter. So our main activities done so far since the chapter has started has been the Biodiversity Matters webinars, the international conferences, and the social media engagements. So for the webinar, what usually happens, is that we engage with our members to determine our theme, our topics, and the planning. So today we've had 4 webinars, which will include the one today. The first one spoke of actions towards halting and reversing biodiversity loss in the Caribbean. The second one spoke to protecting coastal ecosystems, for coastal resilience. And the third one would have talked on impacts of human activities on protected areas and introduction of invasive species. So the recordings of these webinars can be found on our YouTube pages. In terms of attending international conferences, we would have had representatives attend COP16. There was an expanded constituency workshop and adaptation workshop for the Caribbean region by Global Environmental Facility. We would have had representatives attend that. And also we would have had representatives attended the International Youth Conference on Biodiversity. So our social media pages typically have information and interactive posts, which would include highlighting important global biodiversity or environmental days. We would have had fun Caribbean facts from different countries on biodiversity and their environments. And then we have international opportunity listings for people who are interested in attending these events. So these are some of the stuff that you would see on our social media pages. We would have also incorporated uh, training and capacity building sessions, and we've had two recently done so far, and they were very helpful and informative. And we've started to implement a inter-country meetups, which allows people from the various countries. So in this picture, we would have had several Canadians. They would have met up together and they would have tried to get to know each other and network. So quickly, why do we think that you should join GYBN Caribbean? So I have a snippet from our social media pages that says young people play a very important role in conservation of biodiversity and advocacy against biodiversity loss in the Caribbean. GYBN provides a platform and network for youth voices to be part of the conversation. GYBN Caribbean also provides young people with the opportunity to deepen their skills, broaden their networks, and promote intergenerational equity and better become stewards for our future of our beautiful region. So that will bring me to the end of my year of the reflection of our GYBN Caribbean chapter. I will now hand you back over to my fellow member to moderate the event we're all here for. So thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Shansi, for that reflection. But before we jump into the presentations, I would like to get an understanding of what you, the audience, think or understand about the critical role of marine biodiversity. So we will do a little Mentimeter activity. So I would appreciate if everyone could log on to mentimeter.com. I will include the details in the chat right here. The code is 36019895. And when you log on, you will see an open-ended question. Feel free to express yourself. What do you think is the role of marine biodiversity in fostering sustainable growth and livelihoods across the Caribbean? So you can go ahead and log on and answer the question. Let's see what responses we get. Or you can also log in using the QR code to the bottom. Or if you're having issues answering your answers, you can simply type it in the chat. So without marine biodiversity, then sustainability is not possible because different organisms play different important ecological roles. Okay. Anyone else? Just 2 minutes. Marine biodiversity plays a role in livelihoods for coastal folk and our Caribbean fisher folk. Let's see if we can get at least 2 more. Preserving livelihoods, jobs, ecosystem services, yes. Marine biodiversity is a cornerstone of sustainable growth and livelihoods in the Caribbean, underpinning key economic sectors, ecological resilience, and cultural heritage. Also, tourism, fisheries, and for significant number of SIDS, coastal protection, yeah. Marine biodiversity is not just a natural asset, it's a lifeline for the Caribbean. It sustains food systems, protects against climate threats, supports vibrant economies, and enriches cultures. Okay, great. Love that. Love the engagement. Someone in the chat said, simply food, fun, friendship, economic resources, food, recreation activity, fun, and tourism, friendship. I like that. Okay, great. Right, so now it is my pleasure to introduce our panel of speakers. So our first presenter is Mr. Mark Ram. Mark Ram is a lecturer in the Department of Biology at the Faculty of Natural Sciences, University of Guyana. Mr. Ram's research interests and areas of expertise are diverse, focusing on marine and coastal ecology, fisheries management, marine pollution, climate change mitigation, sea level rise, coastal wetlands, and governance of marine resources. His current research focuses on understanding mangrove restoration outcomes in Guyana. Passing the floor over to you, Mark. What do you think is the critical role of marine biodiversity in fostering sustainable development and livelihoods across the Caribbean? And feel free to share any projects that Guyana or you are undertaking in Guyana.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be a part of the panelists here today to speak on something that's very close to my heart, and that's biodiversity, more particularly marine biodiversity. As you've said, yesterday we celebrated the International Day for Biodiversity, and I'd just like to add my voice to this conversation, particularly for us to promote biodiversity conservation across the region. So I guess I can share how I actually got involved a little bit in working in the marine sphere. So after I've completed my bachelor's in biology in 2016, I decided to pursue a master's at that time, immediately after my studies. And for my master's, I actually started looking at mangrove restoration and how they support fisheries. At that time, I was basically looking see if the mangroves here actually support the fisheries, as we've seen in a lot of the literature. So that was the starting point for me in this journey. Since then, I've expanded my research to focus on other aspects, such as marine pollution. I've supervised and worked on with many students on marine pollution, looking particularly at microplastic contamination in many of our marine species, such as our commercial fishes in Guyana. I've also looked at fisheries management, looking at different projects that aims to improve fisheries management in Guyana. I've also worked on climate change and how that impacts marine biodiversity. And I continue to work on mangrove restoration projects. And I've expanded my work, particularly looking right now at restoration outcomes in Guyana. So that's where it started. Apart from the research that I'm doing, I'm also an academic at the University of Guyana. I started working here in 2017 as a scientific officer and subsequently became a lecturer. So I'm one of the marine biology lecturers here. I have also just completed my PhD in marine ecology. from James Cook University. So I returned September, and I'm continuing my research on mangrove restoration outcomes here. So that's a little bit about me, my work, what I'm currently doing. Apart at the university, I lecture some of the marine biology courses, where I guide and nurture the next generation of marine biologists. In terms of your question, can you just repeat that for me, just to ensure that I'm on track?
Yes, so what is the critical role of marine biodiversity in terms of fostering sustainable development and sustainable livelihoods in Guyana? So
Yeah, so marine biodiversity, it's very important here for us. There are many ecosystem services that we get from the marine environment. I can quickly talk about fishes. We're very reliant on fish as a major source of protein here. So definitely, that's the way in which biodiversity support is there for us. Um, and not only to provide a source of protein, but provide livelihoods for many persons in the fishing industry who work in different stages in the value chain, whether those are the fishers that catches the fish, um, the vendors that processes the fish and sell those, or anybody between or anyone else between that chain, even exporters and so forth. So it's a very important marine biodiversity is very important for supporting livelihoods. That's a supporting service that we're highly reliant on. But there are other ecosystem services that we get. Like, for example, our mangrove ecosystem provides biodiversity support. This is very important for us because we live below the sea level here, and having the mangroves, they actually enhance our coastal protection, while at the same time they support other biodiversity services, which I can confirm from some of the studies that I've done, such as fishes, macroinvertebrates, which includes crabs, shrimp, which are all important food sources for us here. Yeah, so that's the second way in which my marine biodiversity is important here for us. Um, there are many other ways in which the mangrove ecosystems in particular support other biodiversity. So these are like supporting birds, very important here. You can see before time, a lot of our coastline, we nearly hardly ever seen any birds here, particularly the scarlet ibis, just a few. But because of the mangrove restoration efforts and natural regeneration, we're seeing an increase in the biodiversity here. And that is very important because they also play other crucial role in regulating the ecosystem. So whether we benefit directly from these marine organisms or these supporting services, or indirectly, they will support biodiversity. So it's apart from the those that I've listed, Guyana also exports a lot of fish, and we're also one of the number one exporter in the world for CBOB, which is a type of shrimp that's only found in this part of the world. So in Guyana, in Suriname, and possibly in Brazil. So we're one of the largest CBOB exporters. So we're not only gaining local benefits from the biodiversity, but we're also gaining foreign exchange through international exports. There is also many opportunities for persons to be supported, their livelihoods to be supported because of marine biodiversity in many different ways here locally. So it's very important that we protect marine biodiversity. And we have been doing so particularly for mangroves. I might be biased to this because this is my study system, but we have been working in Guyana to restore mangroves since 2010. Um, and as a part of that restoration project, which we evaluated, we found that it was highly effective in reinstating some of the biodiversity services, such as fisheries, as I mentioned before. It also supported high levels of blue carbon that's stored in these forests, and supporting us by offering coastal protection. So it is confirmed that the efforts that we've been engaging, which are the mangrove restoration project, has been yielding positive benefits for Guyanese. And because of that, it supports biodiversity as well. So for sustainable development, obviously, we'll need to protect our current assets. We'll need to amplify our local conservation efforts, especially in the face of many different challenges, and so such as pollution here in Guyana, climate change, habitat destruction, rapid coastal development, because we're undergoing a rapid development trajectory here because of oil. So there are many local threats that we'll have to safeguard our marine biodiversity against, particularly if we want to ensure that we have a sustainable future for this marine biodiversity. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for sharing your experience in the field of marine biodiversity and your perspective on the topic, and highlighting the need to protect our natural resources, as well as congratulations on completing your PhD, Dr. Ram.
Thank you.
Okay, right. So next we have Miss Bianca Young. Bianca Young is a Jamaican environmental consultant with over a decade of experience leading sustainability and conservation initiatives across the Caribbean. She currently works with Fauna and Flora, coordinating a Darwin-funded project in St. Lucia that promotes sustainable sea moss farming as a strategy to protect marine biodiversity and strengthen coastal livelihoods. Ms. Young holds a Master of Science in Integrated Climate System Sciences and a Bachelor's in Environmental Studies. Trained in project management and certified as a PADI Dive Master, she is passionate about ecosystem protection, community resilience, and inspiring youth to connect with and advocate for the natural world. Over to you, Bianca.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and good evening to everyone. Just a moment, I'm just going to share my screen. I just have a few slides, and we'll be doing much more talking than looking at slides. Here we go. All right. Thank you again. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak to you all this evening. I was asked to give a brief presentation on my background and what inspired me to get involved in marine biodiversity conservation. It's a field that I'm extremely passionate about. So again, I'm very happy to be able to share my experience. I'm going to speak a little bit about a couple of the projects that I've worked on so that I can sort of highlight the important connection between marine biodiversity and livelihoods. And I'll share a few of the key messages that have emerged from these experiences and that continue to shape my work. So my connection to marine biodiversity began with my love for nature and for the sea, which was nurtured from a young age, growing up in Jamaica, with a family who was involved with as much outdoor bird watching and other activities like that. I learned to swim at the tender age of 2, and I've considered myself sort of a water baby since then. And after a summer job at the airport, not so much fun, I found my way to do something a little bit more fun, and that was to learn how to scuba dive. And I guess from that point on, I would say that the rest was history. So that helped to sort of reframe how I saw my future. And it shaped my academic path and my professional pursuits around environmental conservation. So I was lucky enough to, for instance, be able to conduct my first underwater reef biodiversity surveys during a semester abroad with the School for Field Studies in Turks and Caicos, South Caicos, while I was doing my bachelor's at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. And then I later leaned into climate change and carbon sequestration in my master's research when I was studying at the University of Hamburg in Germany. So once I entered the professional world, it became very clear to me that marine biodiversity is not just about species, it's not just about the sort of research, which is what I was leading into and what I was hoping to continue, but it's also about people and culture and opportunity. And so I kind of veered towards project management and have been lucky enough to be able to be involved in a diverse array of projects, from managing the environmental portfolio for the Sandals Foundation, consulting, doing in data, environmental data with the UN Environment Program. And most recently, I focused on marine and coastal livelihoods in St. Lucia as project coordinator for fauna and flora for a UK-funded initiative, Darwin Initiative, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a few minutes. So just to recap in terms of my background, framing everything through that lens of conservation has not only sort of shaped my purpose, it's also what keeps me rooted and connected to communities and constantly learning, which is really important to me. And it's also sort of sustained my own livelihood as a conservationist. So I think it's a great place to start off this presentation and under this theme. Just a few fact tidbits here. The Caribbean is one of the most biodiverse marine regions in the world. We're home to over 12,000 marine species, 10% of the world's coral reefs, and more than 1,400 species of fish and marine mammals. The species richness supports life at every level, from ecological resilience to economic survival. And marine biodiversity supports livelihoods in a very real and practical way. We see it in fishing, whether that's reef fishing, pelagic species, aquaculture, mariculture, which, like I said, I'll speak about again. That's sea moss farming. In tourism, ecotourism, dive tours, wildlife watching, recreational fishing, our coastal resorts, our cruise industry, they all rely on having a healthy marine ecosystem. For coastal protection, as we heard earlier, mangroves and coral reefs reduce storm surge, erosion, flood damage, and cultural identity, as I was mentioning before. Marine biodiversity shapes what we eat, how we celebrate, and the way that we live here in the Caribbean. So one of the two examples of the projects that I've worked on is through the work that I've done with the Sandals Foundation. So that's where I'm going to start. So I oversaw a diverse array of projects again, and that also included the management of 2 marine sanctuaries or marine protected areas. The goal was to protect biodiversity and restore fish stocks in order to improve the livelihoods of local fishermen. Right? The idea is you have this protected area, your species are not under the stress of fishing, and the boundaries then become the area where fishing can take place. And it acts as a nursery, as a sort of feeding ground for this wider fishing area. Of course, it's not so simple, but that's the idea. But the idea then, I think I was saying, is to protect and improve the livelihoods of local fishermen, some of whom actually became wardens of the sanctuary. And that's a particular strategy that's to improve the effectiveness of those protected areas. So they create real jobs in enforcement, but they also create jobs in education, in research, and in tourism. There's many opportunities, many different ways that we were able to engage different stakeholders. Similarly, we also supported coral restoration projects in Jamaica and in St. Lucia and a couple other places in the Caribbean, working with partners like Claire Caribbean that train coral gardeners here in St. Lucia. I think between 8 and 12 coral gardeners, offering young people a livelihood that was completely new to them, where they're actually helping to grow the reef, populate the reef with fragments of coral that are put into a nursery and nurtured in that way. And so that sort of brings me to the first takeaway that I've had in my career, and that is that marine biodiversity is not a fringe issue. It is foundational for sustainable growth and resilient livelihoods. So I work for an organization called Fauna and Flora International. It's a UK-based conservation organization, and I coordinate a project in St. Lucia titled Developing Sustainable Sea Moss Farming Methods. And like I said before, it's funded by the UK government through the Darwin Initiative. And sea moss farming is a major livelihood for over 200 coastal farmers on the southeast coast of St. Lucia. And while it started off as a small-scale industry in the 1980s, it boomed during the time of COVID-19 because people were searching for alternative livelihoods. And the biodiversity-related issues with sea moss farming is that it takes place in a very ecologically sensitive zone, right there in the coastal waters where there are seagrass beds, coral reefs, and mangrove ecosystems. And in particular for this project, one of the sort of biodiversity issues that was identified was the use of wooden stakes as part of the the farming infrastructure, which are being harvested from either the mangroves or the coastal dry forest, which is home to some critical species. And so the whole point of the project is to pilot and introduce improved methods, helping farmers shift to sort of more sustainable materials, and also to shift practices that reduce their impact. We're also working on policy frameworks, the national management framework, to support the long-term viability of the industry. Training is involved, financial literacy, export readiness, food safety, and these are topics that were identified by the stakeholders, so the industry professionals as well as farmers alike. And our approach in managing the project is it sort of demonstrates that sustainability isn't just about the method, right? It's also about stability, it's about economics. So what's going to work for the long term, and how do we ensure that the industry, which is now the #1 agricultural export in St. Lucia, and foreign exchange earner, how do we ensure that it continues and is ecologically sensitive? So from that project, the main takeaway for me has been that conservation must be people-centered. So when we engage farmers as stewards and equip them with these better tools and information, which we're developing alongside them, we're protecting ecosystems and supporting livelihoods at the same time. But of course, there are challenges. Climate change continues to stress ecosystems. Marine ecosystems are overfished. Policy enforcement is often inconsistent. And we have gaps in funding, gaps in technical capacity, gaps in long-term planning. But for me, in my experience, one of the critical challenges in pretty much all of the projects that I've been involved with is, and it's also connected to like my final takeaway message is that systems have to be in place and systems have to work. They have to be effective. We need laws and policies, effective enforcement, and a space for biodiversity in development. In the case of CMOS, for example, we are playing catch up with the systems because the industry took off so rapidly because, like I said, of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for this alternative livelihood. And of course, the sort of health related boom that came along with that. But things are lagging on the policy side. Things are lagging on the management side. Another example, back to protected areas, and that happens here in St. Lucia, in Jamaica, across the region, is that enforcement oftentimes is weak. And we end up with a lot of paper parks where we have protected areas, documented on paper, but either having little or no management at all, sometimes just in the name of meeting our international commitments. And so we do have to play a role and think critically about how we move forward with the projects and the industries that we're supporting to ensure that we're really looking at being effective. Every challenge is also an opportunity for innovation and collaboration. And of course, what's really important is resilience. So before I sign off and say thank you, I will just recap the three messages that sort of have really shaped my experience. And that's firstly, if you remember that marine biodiversity is foundational for growth and survival. Conservation has to be people-centered and rooted in local realities. And finally, that systems have to be effective and they have to be in place. They have to work. We need policy, enforcement, and that space for biodiversity in development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bianca. And thank you for highlighting the need to engage people in marine conservation and having that people-centered approach. I think that's very, very important. And now for the last presentation on today's topic, that is going to be delivered by Mr. Ian Horsford. So Mr. Ian Horsford holds a Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology and Mathematical Science from the University of Guelph in Canada, and a Master of Science in Marine Resource Economics from the University of Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. He is a recipient of several fellowships and awards, including the Joint Japan or World Bank Graduate Scholarship and the Latin American and Caribbean Environmental Economics Program Scholarship. He is currently employed as the Chief Fisheries Officer with the Antigua and Barbuda Fisheries Division. Mr. Horsford has also served as a consultant or technical expert to various organizations, including the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the International Collective in Support of Fish Workers, as well as the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute. He is the current Deputy Chair of the Executive Committee of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism. Welcome, Ian, and over to you.
Thank you for that. Welcome. I'm happy to be here. Let me see what I can share my experiences with you. Let's go to the presentation. Let's see. Here we go. Great. Yes. I wouldn't go through all that lengthy background information that was already covered, but for me, my interest in the environment, naturally curious about the environment, particularly the marine environment. As a child, I always wondered how things work. So I have this passion for scientific research, and that has really put me on this path with respect to marine biodiversity conservation. My presentation will basically be focusing on some of the governing principles in terms of how I approach marine management, as well as the role and importance of fisheries, biodiversity challenges, some of the success strategies, and some take-home points. For those of you who are not familiar, I see some colleagues from Antigua. You know, Antigua is basically predominantly a small-scale reef fisheries. Most of it is based on healthy coral reefs, seagrass beds, and more recently, although we have a fairly large exclusive economic zone, we haven't really targeted the large pelagics, and we're making some strides in that regards. So effectively actually govern small-scale fisheries, one have to realize the complexity, the complex nature of a fishery system. Now, when I talk about fishery systems, I'm talking about complex interaction among human and non-human factors. We often focus on the non-human aspect of it. And I seem like I'm actually converging with all my former presenters, where we tend to focus on more the biotic and the abiotic factors, things like water temperature, salinity, those factors, as opposed to focusing on the real element that have an impact on the resource itself, which is really human beings and fishing communities. You have various elements: social, economic, legal, political, cultural. All these factors drive our interaction with nature. With such a complex system, in terms of approaches, things such as a precautionary approach, as you would realize, there's lots of uncertainty even in terms of research. Very important. You also have ecosystem approach to fisheries, where you also try and involve stakeholders, look at the system, a holistic approach to managing the system, as well as inclusivity in terms of respect to gender and other factors, as well as adaptive management, where you have a feedback mechanism where you learn from your mistakes and incorporate that in the management process. In terms of some of the roles and importance with respect to biodiversity, both of my colleagues would have mentioned things such as employment. In the case of Antigua and Barbuda, much of fisheries production is market-driven. Tourism stay-over arrivals have an impact on demand. Additionally, sometimes there are exogenous shocks, things such as, for instance, when we had the Great Recession, 2008 financial crisis, all these things impact on the demand placed on the resource. With that in mind, you have to have a holistic approach, not just focusing. You have to look at the economics, because that's a major driver of effort on the natural resource. Again, things such as food security, nutrition, foreign exchange. In the case of Antigua and Barbuda, they export a lot of lobsters to the tune of about 5 million EC dollars a year on average. Also important for food security. This was very important during COVID. As if you would note that we have a high per capita consumption, a lot of that is driven by imports. But even though you may actually remove the imports, we still have a fairly high production, 10.3 kilograms per annum, which is basically roughly equivalent to Latin America and the Caribbean, with imports included. Hence, Antigua and Barbuda is food secure in terms of protein-based, fish protein based solely on domestic demand. Other services provided, things such as recreational, sports fishing, diving. All these services are provided by a healthy ecosystem. With that, you also, in terms of challenges, you run the risk of overexploitation. Fisheries act as a safety net for other economic activity, particularly in Antigua and Barbuda. 52% of fishers have some other form of employment, whether it be in tourism, construction, transportation. Those sectors are key. In the past, things such as agriculture would be the next alternative livelihood, and multi-occupationality is also high. It's a means to actually foster some level of resilience to economic shocks. In the case of when we had the lockdown and COVID, the number of individuals licensing or registering for the first time increased by 262%. Luckily, in 2013, we moved from an open access to a limited entry regimes. So that was allowed for greater control of fishing effort, and as well as to ensure sustainability. Some of the other challenges we face, the habitat loss, things such as tourism and port infrastructure development. We've lost a lot of our wetlands, a lot of our, one of our largest wetland area, Jolly Harbor, is basically converted into a marina with condos as far back as, I think it was in the 1980s. Other challenges we face, loss of beaches, turtle nesting sites due to improper setbacks. Antigua and Barbuda have issues with drought, so desalination is becoming more and more common, and we're facing the phenomena of having dead zones associated with the brine from the production. Other challenges we face, things such as urbanization. In the case of Barbuda, sand mining remains a challenge. Long list of marine pollution, plastics, microplastics, nanoplastics, oil spills, industrial waste, sewage waste management, noise pollution associated with seismic surveys, agricultural runoff, light pollution. These can disorientate turtles and deter adult nesting. From my standpoint, climate change is perhaps the biggest challenge we face. 10 out of 16 Caribbean states are ranked in the top 30, with 6 in the top 10 in terms of economic losses from extreme weather events. This is based on the Global Climate Risk Index. Countries such as Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Bahamas, Haiti are ranked within the top 10. Other issues, you also have coastal erosion, ocean acidification, coral bleaching. 2023, 2024, these have been record years for coral bleaching. And the new guy in the block, I should say, well, starting in 2012, the issue of the sargassum phenomena associated with algal bloom associated with agriculture runoff. On the upside, my previous colleague spoke on the issue of governance. We have managed to move from a top-down approach to one that's participatory. The reason for that is more to be gained when individuals understand our part of making decisions. You tend to have greater buy-in and greater respect for the rules and governing the management of the resource. We have used various versions of co-management in Antigua, from consultative to collaborative in the area of research, citizen science with conch divers, and in terms of shark fisheries, where we looked at using baited underwater remote cameras to survey abundance for nearshore sharks. In the case of Barbuda, there's delegated co-management where the local council is responsible for management up to 3 nautical miles from the coast. One of the major changes that help us to actually better manage the fisheries is the limited entry regime. If when you have shocks, economic shocks, you have this rush to fish, without this mechanism, you cannot properly manage the total effort going into the fisheries. Other measures includes closed seasons, gear restrictions. We'd have a number of closed seasons for Nasa grouper, red hind, coney, parrotfish, lobsters, as well as queen conch. Other things that we also looking at is harmonizing closed season. And OECS years ago in the 1990s is basically the OECS harmonized legislation. We had managed to put in place a framework for harmonizing the closed season for lobster, May 1st to the 31st of August throughout the OECS countries. Over the years, that has changed due to economic pressure. For instance, in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados is heavily reliant on the sole fishery of lobster exports. So it's only in recent times that they have actually adopted the closed season. The Latin American countries, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, all these countries have come together and harmonized the closed season. This allows for greater management and deterrence when it comes to IUU fishing because all of the seasons are harmonized together. Other strategies include National Plan of Action to combat IUU, legal and unreported and unregulated fishing. I mentioned research with respect to sharks. There's a National Plan of Action on sharks where we strategize with the local community on the way forward in terms of conservation and management of the particularly large apex predators. One thing that has significantly improved compliance is our CAT certification program, where proof of purchase from authorized fishers and vessels are required for trade. So for you to trade, the individual has to have records indicating who they buy from, copies of the individual's license, vessel's license, to present proof if they intend to export or trade. We have the issue of ghost fishing. We have used biodegradable panels in fish traps, for instance. So when a trap is lost, after a period of time, in the case of the material on the right, hemp, in 6 weeks, the panel will drop out of the pots and it will not continue to fish. We've also managed to expand our marine protected areas and make greater use of our marine spatial planning. Again, my colleague mentioned, I don't know if she saw my presentation or we just great minds think alike. The issue of resilience, it has to be people-centered. So in the case of fishers, one of the challenges you had in the past in addressing the poverty nexus is, for instance, individuals would not contribute to social protection programs such as Social Security and medical benefit. So when they reach an age and, for a pension, no money would be available. So we have made all that mandatory as a prerequisite for actually registering as a fisher. Some of the key take-home points. This has to do more with funding. Need to focus more on the long-term game, particularly in terms of establishing effective governance framework, including policies, laws, strategies. While projects, we spend a lot of time chasing projects. It's normally a short-term stopgap fix to a long-term problem. The only how you can address that is to have effective work programs where you work on these things over a long period. Again, my colleague had mentioned it, development cannot be sustainable unless it's people-centered. Human factors are what drive the interaction with the environment. Other points include incorporating ecosystem connectivity in management. Again, issue of harmonized closed season, collaboration with neighbors in terms of transboundary issues. These are things that can be done to enhance management. And the elephant in the room, payment for ecosystem services. We can look at the issue of the carbon market, subsidies, incentives for conservation, community-based agreements. This is one of the areas over the years I've found the Caribbean in general lacking. There seems to be a disconnect between traditional economists and marine resource economists. We're somewhat seen as more theoretical. So things such as valuing ecosystems and putting a price on it, and I think these things are not done, and there's resistance to that, despite all these beautiful policies making reference to payment for ecosystem services. Finally, scaling up climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as financing. All this is critical, start the process of decarbonizing with respect to fossil fuels, as well as incorporating climate resilience in development. And very important, risk insurance facility, given the predictions with respect to climate change, as well as strengthening social protection programs. All these things are critical if we're taking a holistic approach when it comes to managing marine biodiversity. With that, I'd like to say thank you, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for that insightful presentation and showing us that supporting fisheries and food security fosters sustainable growth and livelihoods. And I note that having a people-centered, holistic approach and inclusivity is the underlying theme for tonight's webinar, which is very important.